The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. Well, it's evening for me. I'm expecting you all in different time zones in all of your respective countries, but thank you for taking the time out of your day today to join us at this webinar this evening or this afternoon. And what I want to be talking about today is 10 ways to market your project. And I'm delighted to be here. It's a webinar that's been sponsored by Simplilearn, and hopefully there'll be lots of things that we can discuss today that will help you work with your stakeholders and communicate effectively on your projects. I thought I should start off really by telling you a little bit about myself. My name's Elizabeth Harrin. I've always been interested in project communications and I write a blog about it. Today I'm going to talk about something that's quite close to my heart, which is taking communications that little bit further. So trying to make sure that your project communications are really a worthwhile activity so that you can review the different options available to you, and at the end of this hopefully you'll have some good tips that you can take away with you to include in your own project communications planning. Now what I would ask is that you'll see that there is a chat option and questions. You'll have the options to ask questions as well. I will be able to take questions at the end. If you'd like to use those functions on the webinar software, on GoToWebinar, you can record your questions there and I will pick up as many as I can at the end. Hopefully you can all see that there. Just expand it in the sidebar and you'll be able to enter your questions for everyone to have a look at. Right, so let's jump in. I think probably the first thing I should do is clarify what I mean by marketing. And in a project environment, marketing is a planned series of tasks with the objective of promoting your project to a wide audience. Which is, that's fine, but it hopefully that explains to you that it goes beyond the communications planning. I'm assuming that you've all got some experience of working in a project environment, and you've either been involved in writing project communications yourself in the form of status reports or other things, or you've received that information from the project manager that you've been working with. Even if perhaps you don't have the title of project manager, you probably are still sharing information about the work that you're doing. So the reason I think that there's something more we can do above and beyond project communication is because marketing for me is promotional. It's the promotional activity that gets people to believe and love and want what it is that your project is delivering for them. It's making sure that your communications plan for your project has an impact beyond the paper that it's written on and beyond what simply communication on a functional level. So finally, to be clear on this point, I'm talking about marketing to your colleagues, not to the general public. So whatever it is that your project is delivering, marketing your product externally is not something that you as a project team member or a project manager would have any involvement with. So what we are really looking for here is things that you can do internally to sell the ideas of your project to your colleagues to generate stakeholder engagement. Okay, so that's fine. Is that all rhetoric, or does it actually work in real life? So let's take a look at some research. Taking a marketing-led approach to projects really does impact project success. This is some research done by Peter Taylor last year, 2014. 87% of respondents said that the marketing activities they did on their project had an impact on project success. And you can see here that nearly half of them believed that it was really critical to delivering that successful project result. Normally, when you look at data like this, you'll see one typical response, and that's the "it had no impact" response. And that isn't on this pie chart because nobody replied to that survey saying that marketing was unimportant. And I thought that was really interesting. So it talks to me about the fact that generally people believe that marketing your project and being able to share those positive messages is a really good idea. So if that's what marketing is all about, and it is impactful for project success, what tools do we have available to us to actually do it? Well, let's have a think about the typical project communication tools that we know and love and probably use on our projects day to day. When I was putting this presentation together, I thought about the tools that I use most often to communicate with my team and stakeholders. And the top 4 tools that I came up with were these. Number 4, web conferencing. This is me. This is me on Skype. I use web conferencing to talk to my colleagues and to talk to friends and family. It's easy, it's practical, it's something that we're doing right now. I also use instant messaging. It's a good way of chatting to people. It's a good way of making sure that you can find out if somebody is at their desk. If you need a quick answer to something, it's a very appropriate way of informally getting that information. So we use that too. Project status reports. This is a picture of an actual project status report that I use on my projects to communicate to my sponsor. It's a weekly report. I still send it out in a Word document format, which is what you can see here. It's one big table, even though I know that tables don't display well on Blackberries, and the people who are reading the report are likely to be travelling. They're the kind of people who use their Blackberries a fair amount of the time. So despite technology moving on, in many respects, the way we communicate with our project sponsors follows the tried and tested route of following normal, perhaps what we would call traditional project status reporting in a Word document or another document format like this. And the number one thing, well, in order to put this sort of list of top typical project communication tools together, I didn't want to rely on just my own experience. So I asked on an online forum for the top communication tips. And actually we got pretty much the same results as this. The number one tool and technique in use for project communication is stakeholder management. And you can see the kind of responses that people gave me here. They're talking about identifying your stakeholders, carrying out traditional stakeholder analysis, reviewing it within the context of organisational politics, and it goes on. More stakeholder management. There's identify your stakeholders, assess the power, the legitimacy of your stakeholders, and put them into categories. Really, there is no denying that stakeholder management processes, documents, analysis, they are all a fantastic tool for project communication. But what I would really stress to you is that you don't create engagement or change behaviour in your stakeholders by filling in a power and impact grid. You need more than those stakeholder assessments to make people understand what it is that you're trying to do. And there's nothing wrong with stakeholder management. It's a very important part of getting your project set up right at the beginning and making sure you have identified those people that you need to do communication with. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm saying we need to do that and then other activities as well to make sure that we're really acting on all the information we've drawn out of stakeholder management, out of those processes. So you're not going to get buy-in and you're not going to get your stakeholders to do anything simply because you filled in a document that ticks a box to say whether they are powerful or influential on your project. You need to take actions in order to drive that activity. So that's a sort of introduction, I suppose, because what I want to talk about now is to dive into those 10 ways that you can take all those things we've looked at, those traditional ways of stakeholder communication and the stakeholder analysis, and take it further. So let's get back to that. My 10 suggestions for ways that you can really bring on the stakeholder analysis, the status reports to the next level, and give you some tools that you can take away and use next week on your projects to really start to market your projects to your stakeholders. And it starts with getting a good story. Think about why you were doing your project and how it meets the business's requirements. How is it going to change their lives for the better? You'll probably have heard this before, but it's really understanding the answer to the question, what's in it for me? If you can work out the what's in it for me for each of your stakeholder groups that you identified in that stakeholder analysis, then you can target your project communications much more effectively, and you're talking about benefits. People are not really interested in the journey, they're interested in what they get out of it at the end, the benefits. You don't have to work on many projects before you hit resistance to change. People don't like change, and a good story helps you remove the roadblocks, or at least minimize the impact of the roadblocks along the way. So how do you get that? You have to start with creating a vision. I'm just looking through the questions here. It looks like people are having difficulty hearing me. I'm sorry about that. There is a voice recording. If you can't hear me, you won't be able to hear me say that. And if you have asked the question about whether you can get a copy of the slides, yes, I can definitely share copies of the slides. So let's talk about your vision. The project vision should be something really, really easy, something that can be clearly stated. It's the road you're travelling and where you are going. It should be aligned to the business goals, and it should be something that is preferably aligned to overarching corporate strategy and your department goals. Even better if you can get all of those in it at the same time: business goals, department goals, and aligned to corporate strategy. So you should be able to articulate how that is going to happen. And it shows that there's value being delivered, and it helps move the organisation forward. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to set your project in the context of the business and make it relevant to the work and the experiences of your stakeholders. That all sounds a bit woolly, actually. But the most important thing is that your vision should be achievable. People need to believe that you're going to deliver it. People will find it hard to follow you if they believe that your plan is unrealistic, because they won't want to be associated with something that it looks like it's going to fail. So try to create a vision that people can get behind, and if it feels like it might be something that they feel is unachievable, you might want to break it down into smaller steps. Ultimately, your project story should enable people to clearly see what's in it for them and what's in it for the business overall. It's promotional, and we'll talk later about what happens when there's no positive story to share, because I know that in my experience, and I'm sure in yours, you're aware that not all projects deliver things that the stakeholders are necessarily wanting, or that have a great sales message. So you've got to start with your team. Mostly we think of project communication, stakeholder analysis, project marketing. It's something that we do to people outside the team. But you have to have your team on side. They are ambassadors for your project, and they need to be consistently selling the story of your project and promoting the benefits to the people that they work with and meet. Because they're your ambassadors, they will be chatting to people offhand, informally, and they need to be saying what you want them to say. They need to be sharing your vision. They'll provide you with updates for your standard communications, but they've got to be behind you in any marketing effort as well. So they need to believe in it, and most importantly, they mustn't undermine your efforts. And that is surprisingly easy to do with a few offhand remarks, especially if those offhand remarks are to the wrong person. So, project marketing should be everybody's responsibility. There's a benefit which is not just about delegating the work of communication to others. It's everyone's responsibility, but it doesn't make it everyone's task. But the spin-off benefit is that messages count for more if your stakeholders hear it from their peers and not from you. And that's because, as a project manager, you're supposed to be positive about the project. It's your job. The message has a much greater impact if they hear those good things from other people as well. So ask your team to talk about the project informally, especially when you have hit key milestones or they've delivered something. So, where they've had a small success, either personally or as part of the wider project team, encourage them to talk about it. People follow the lead of those in power. So identify which of the stakeholders from your stakeholder analysis have that power. And remember, when you think about power in your stakeholders and in your project team, it comes from different sources. So experts might be impressed by other experts, but they might not be impressed by somebody higher up the hierarchy. You can also build a network of positive supporters and draw on them to spread the word, and your stakeholder analysis is perfect for showing you who those people might be. The practical issue here is making sure that everyone understands that the job of communication is not just the responsibility of the project manager, and you might have to tell them what you expect. Don't assume they'll suddenly become communication ambassadors for you. You'll need to spell it out. Senior managers have a role to play in unblocking those issues and moving roadblocks, and communication is part of that. So as well as you and your team, the senior managers that you work with should be as on message as you are when you're talking about your project. Thirdly, your team is potentially quite close to you, perhaps not necessarily geographically, but in terms of your work, you're working closely together. But outside of your team, there are a lot of ways to reach stakeholders. Your messages will not get through, however good the story, however engaged your own team, if you aren't hanging out where your stakeholders are. I'm currently working on an upgrade of an HR system, and I now use Skype because the HR team do. It's not my preferred method of communication. It wasn't before this project came along, but it's easier for me to change my habits than to expect my client, my project customer, to do something different to how they normally work. I've got to adapt and flex my own style because I want to be easy to do business with. Project managers should be doing that. They should have to expect to flex their style and the tools that they're using to suit the needs of the stakeholders. Don't expect your stakeholders to adopt new ways of working for them because it's more convenient for you, because they just won't do it. So along with that comes the acknowledgement that it is more work. There's more work involved when you adopt that approach because it means using multiple channels to suit the needs of different groups of stakeholders. So I might be using Skype to talk to one group and I'd be using something else to talk to another. But that's my job. That's part of the job. Project managers are primarily focused on creating participation in projects. So if you want to boost participation, build engagement, promote your project, do all of this wonderful stuff that gets people on side and supportive of the change that you're trying to push through, then tailoring your communication is just part of what needs to be done. Tailoring those messages also means critically assessing which channels are available to you for communication. And with that in mind, you need to think about how you can vary your tools. Even if your communication plan and stakeholder analysis tells you that a particular stakeholder likes to receive information by email, it's good to mix it up from time to time. It helps keep the message fresh. It helps reach a bigger audience. And marketing is all about reaching as wide an audience as possible to spread the information about your project. Now, there are dozens of ways that you can communicate. You don't have to rely on the tools that I mentioned earlier as the top ones that I use. Here are some. You may well have used these already on your projects. Posters, you can use you can use presentations. You can use a wiki, dashboards, the staff magazine. You've got user guides, social media tools, pictures. There's video, reports, desktops, internal intranet sites or social collaboration tools if you have them in your business. Even things like posters. Then you've got red, amber, green status, leaflets, FAQ documents, One-to-ones, you can actually talk to people in real life, in person. Conference calls, webinars like we're doing now, long content, short content, roundtable meetings with a few people, town hall meetings with lots of people, and also the things that you might think of as traditional marketing materials like t-shirts or promotional pens, mugs, testimonials, success stories of where this has worked in a different office that you're now bringing it to a new audience, competitions, training sessions, all these things, demos, prototypes, models, they all give you the option to talk about your project in a very positive way. I hope most of that terminology means something to you. One terminology I will explain is desk drops. I think that might be a particular UK term, but what I mean by that is a leaflet that you would put on everybody's desk in the morning. So when your staff, when the team comes into work, everybody's got something on their desk, a piece of paper. Normally we use desk drops as sort of a guide to what might look different that day. So don't forget, we've installed this software. When you switch on your computer, you will see this message or something like that, or a couple of screenshots of how to log into this new application, that kind of thing, to just physically remind people that a change has happened. There are also less obvious sources of good PR, like providing information or resources to other teams at short notice. Those activities don't have a blanket reach, and they might not feel like traditional communication activities, but they will create positive engagement, albeit on a much smaller scale. And that engagement is likely to be deeper than in the case of receiving a mug. You know, a mug with a project slogan on, great, but it doesn't necessarily make me engaged. Whereas if I can help out another team, I'm much more likely to create a deeper relationship. Communication is a two-way street, and just because you tell someone about something or you ask for their involvement, it doesn't mean it will happen. And we'll talk more about feedback later, but I thought this was a good point to remind everybody that project marketing can't just be about pushing messages out there. It needs to be ways of receiving messages as well. So another reason to vary your tools is because people need to hear information between 3 and 5 times before they believe it. And if you get over 5 times, it starts to lose its effectiveness and people are just, yeah, heard that before. It's also beneficial for individuals to hear the message from a range of different people. So if you tell them 3 to 5 times, it won't be as effective as if they hear it 3 to 5 times from 3 to 5 different sources. And also bear in mind that it's useful for them to hear it from someone more senior to them or someone they respect. Look for ways that you can include quotes from your project board members in newsletter articles or intranet pages, or invite them to come to events with you. If you're going to talk to a team or you're hosting a town hall meeting, wheel out your senior members of staff, wheel out your sponsor or the director who's championing your project, because it really will help get your message across. So you've got a lot of communication happening, you've got a lot of different tools, you've got a lot of repetition, and you have to be a bit careful because you need to create a balance. You want to avoid information overload. I love this picture with the traffic lights and all the different signs, and you come to the junction and you think, actually, what am I supposed to do? What do I read first? People can and they will be fatigued by your messages because they'll hear you harping on and on and on about your project. And you could probably give me examples of marketing messages and advertising that you see so often, like billboards at the side of the road, that you just stop noticing it's there. Now, I can't give you a scientific method for working out when that's going to happen on your project. So there's no rule that I can tell you. So my best tip is to create a communications calendar, and that runs alongside the rest of your communications plan. So you can easily see which messages are going out, when they're going out, and who's getting them. I like the idea of a calendar because you can judge if one audience is receiving too much information at any one time, or conversely, they're not receiving enough. You can make subtle shifts to make sure that it's spread evenly. Now, another way to help balance your message is to ditch the words and go visual. YouTube is the second largest search engine after Google, with over 1 billion unique visitors per month. Pinterest, the fastest growing social network last year, and it saw a 97% growth in active users. So there is no doubting from numbers like that pictures help you get your message across. There was a study at the University of Minnesota, and it found that presenters who used visual aids were considered 43% more persuasive. And you need to be persuasive about your project because you need to make sure that people are really bought into what it is that you want them to do. So it will really help you if you can include images in some of your project communications planning. So let me give you an example. If I told you I was working on a construction project and it was 2% complete, what do you think of? What if I showed you a picture? Here is a project under construction, quite an old project, and it's 2% complete at this point in time. Now, if I was the project sponsor, I'd be really excited about this. 2% doesn't sound very much, but the team has broken ground. My vision is becoming a reality. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, very little has actually happened. We literally just have a hole in the ground, but it started, and I know that my construction is underway. Here we are at 5%, a little bit higher up, got the foundations in, and we're starting to see progress. 10% complete? Can you tell what it is yet? Now, if this was my project, I would know exactly what that is, and I would be able to start visualizing what that would look like when it's finished. Even though, grand scheme of things, 10% is really not very far through the project at all. Here's the project at 20%. Clearly looking like a building now. We can see some stairs, and even though stakeholders will acknowledge there's a long way to go, this is great at persuading our investors that we've got the skills to complete this project and we're hitting our deadlines along the way. Right, it's 50% complete, and you can tell what it is. And we're only halfway through the project. But project stakeholders can use the visual reports of progress to engage with the project and the development and ensure that it's progressing as their vision. And here it is at 100%, and we've built the Eiffel Tower. Now, visual also gives you the opportunity to think about other things outside of photographs, so video. You can use video, it's not expensive, you don't need professional kit to do it any longer. We were talking the other day about recording a training session on a mobile phone camera and making that available for people so we didn't have to visit every single individual and train them. So there are some great clever ways that you can use video without actually having to spend any money on equipment. Here are some screenshots from a video we made about a big software implementation. I think this was about 18 months, 2 years ago now. Originally, the project sponsor and I planned to travel to each of the 40 locations that we were rolling out this software to discuss the impact and to answer questions directly from a wide group of stakeholders. And when we looked at the logistics, it really wasn't practical for us to take that much time away from managing the project to solely focus on sharing messages and just to do communication. So we made a video of what we would have told them face to face. So you can see here it's a mixture of talking heads. That's me. There's my manager giving a tour around the new servers. There's some screenshots of the software, and there's also some panning shots. Here are some people at work. It was a new software project. It's not something exciting. We're not building the Eiffel Tower. There's nothing really to look at apart from some screens of software and wireframes. But you can still create interesting videos with a mix of participation from the project team, and it was fun and engaging for the project team to do as well. This video was watched by key people at all locations, and we had excellent feedback on it. You can see how many times a video has been watched through YouTube. We hosted this one on YouTube, but we published it as private, so only people with the link could see it. And there wasn't any confidential information in there anyway. It was a really simple way to promote the project, to explain what was going on behind the scenes, and to reach a wide audience, and most importantly, to give people a consistent message without having to meet them individually. because the alternative was providing a slide deck and allowing local team managers to share our messages for us. And they could still do that, they could still ask and answer questions, and we did have some FAQs in presentation format, but this meant that the core messages came from us. On the plus side, we probably reached more people through this than through town hall style meetings where we went and visited people. But on the negative side, I had to rely on phone calls, emails, and capturing queries via the intranet instead of hearing and responding to questions face-to-face in real time. So there's payoffs and choices in every communication decision that you make. One of the things I made sure to do for all written communication on that project, and all my projects actually, including any of the text that appeared on the video, is to proofread. Now, I found this image and I thought it was funny given that it's on the side of a railway bridge. You really have to hunt out errors in your marketing materials and your project communications because nothing undermines your credibility faster than spelling and grammar mistakes. Because what happens is your audience focuses on the error and not the message. And that is really not the response that you want. You want them to be thinking about the content of what you're saying, not how you're saying it. Now, grammar doesn't come naturally to everybody, that's fine. And if you don't feel confident in your own ability to pull out errors, pass it on to somebody else to read. It doesn't necessarily either come down to your level of ability to command your native language, because the closer you are to the material, the more times you've looked at it yourself, the less likely you are able to see the errors, because you're just too close to the detail. And that's why it's a good idea to leave time between writing it and proofreading it, or you give it to somebody else to check for you. Just make sure that you build that time lag into your communications plan so you're never sending out anything that's been rushed and not adequately checked. Even if it is just get someone from the next desk to come and read it over your shoulder before you hit send. It doesn't have to be a big sort of content approval loop or anything, but a second pair of eyes can really help. On the subject of communications plans, it's great. We've talked about lots of different activity, but it really all needs to be underpinned by a strong plan. Think about what tasks you need to do. Think about what budget you've got available to you. And think about what team members you have available. I was able to delegate making the video to our project coordinator on that project, and he had a small budget to get the work done. Think about who else needs to be involved. There might be cases where you need to get copy clearance from the corporate PR team, or there might be other approvals required before you can carry out your marketing activities. And to give you an example of that, mostly when you see senior executives quoted in corporate literature, it's not them who've actually said the words. The words of the quotes have probably been made up by a press officer or their assistant. And that's fine because they're a figurehead and a spokesperson. But more often than not, if you are doing something like that, you need to get that senior person to check that what you've quoted them as saying is acceptable, and that you are making sure that you're accurately reflecting their views in how you've recorded what they've said, or what you think they would have said if you'd asked them the question. So your plan overall for all your project communications will reflect the context of your project, but it also needs to sit grounded within what's going on everywhere else in the business. And that's why it's important to be part of a joined up story. Project communications are easy enough to plan. The stakeholder group is normally immediate customers, your suppliers, and your team. Project marketing activity also needs to be part of a plan to take your project to a wider audience, like the whole of the rest of the company. And it should be part of a joined up story. And by that I mean your messages should not conflict with messages from other projects. Check. Because people don't receive information from only one source. They will receive information about multiple projects from multiple departments, and they piece it together to form their own story. So tap into what else is happening in the business. Tie in with other projects where there are synergies. At a minimum, check what other messages those projects are putting out there. and try to connect your communications plan to those strategic initiatives. I suppose what I'm trying to say really is that your project story should be a chapter of the bigger story of what's happening in your company at the time. Just so that it's all aligned, it all fits together, and when people hear it, it automatically drops into place rather than them thinking, oh, that doesn't sound like what so-and-so from the finance team told me last week. So when you're planning, look forward at what you have yet to do, that's fine, but you also need to look back at what you've already achieved, and you can include that in your messages as well. So in the context of story, set your current announcement in the timeline. Show, in your journey if you like, show how the project has evolved, and if you can, demonstrate those quick wins or the links with other departments and initiatives that have got the project team to where they are today. Without dwelling on it too much, because people are much more interested in what's happening today and in the future than what's happened in the past, but it does help them see the bigger picture if you can include a little bit of that backstory. What you're trying to do is cite your project in the context of the business goals and make sure that people feel that however small, however insignificant it might feel to other people, your project is actually an integral part of what's happening in the organisation, and it links to those goals in a big way or in a small way. Part of your communications and marketing should be around planning for a crisis. Now, there will be one. There is always a crisis on projects at some point, a big one or a small one. There's always things that go wrong, and sometimes the things that go wrong can be quite significant. How you deal with them reflects on you as a project manager, and it reflects on your project. So given that you've spent a lot of time getting your communication and marketing efforts right to this point, you really don't want to undermine it all by messing it up when it comes to talking about problems. It's also, if you're thinking, what can we take as a positive from having a crisis? Crisis communications is a good opportunity to reach a different audience, because you're talking about messages around how you're handling problems, and you're hopefully communicating professionally and proactively, which shows your skills as a project manager. Unfortunately, it's quite hard to plan for a crisis. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but there are some things you can do in advance to make sure that your whole team knows how to deal with significant problems when they arise, if they arise, because let's be positive, let's hope that your project isn't going to suffer a big crisis. So the first thing I would sort out with my team is to have a single point of contact. So if something goes wrong, you know exactly who should be the person who's in charge. Now that could be you as the project manager, or it could be somebody else on the project team. Everybody needs to know who to go to for communication updates and who will be ringing them regularly to ask for their status updates. Make sure that people know that they have to respond to that individual's request for information. That person is dedicated to running communication for all stakeholders for the duration of the issue. Deal only in facts. You've got to do that. There's quite a lot of emotions during a problem. People have an emotional response to what's gone wrong, and that's normal. But you want to strip that back and deal with what you know to be true. Gather information from sources of complaint or concern so that your communications are responding to what people are worrying about. Now, that might sound counterproductive because behind the scenes you might be dealing with something big, like a big software bug or something like that, but your end users might be worried about something else, which perhaps in the grand scheme of things is not really that important. However, it's important to them. Those concerns are valid. Listen to what they're saying, deal with what's bothering them, and that might mean you're splitting your efforts between 2 or more activities, but they are your stakeholders and their opinion matters. If you can fix what's worrying them, they will feel a lot more confident about the work that's going on in the background to fix other problems. That works if you can be fast. Get your messages out there as quickly as possible because it's the best way to squash gossip before it starts. On a big project, or one that's generated some interest from the public, like, I don't know, building a supermarket or something like that, you'll want to get someone on site to control the media and to control staff who might wander off and talk to the media and be an ear to the ground. So in that situation, your corporate communications team will probably take control. They'll pester you for information, and you'll have to put up with it because they are trying to help put a problem right. Now, we rely an awful lot on electricity for project communications through email, through webinars, through instant messaging. But if a crisis happens, you might not have electricity to fall back on. People dig up power cables. It's happened to us before on one of my projects. Power lines are cut through, generators go down. When you can't rely on email or people being in front of their computers, how are you going to get your messages out there? Stick that on your risk log just so that you've got something that you can think about. Finally, on crisis communication, stay on message. You must make sure that everybody hears the same version of the story, whatever their position. It undermines your communication efforts if different stakeholders are receiving different versions of the truth. And that goes for when there isn't a problem as well. You know, really, you're tailoring your message, but the underlying message is exactly the same. It should be the same for everybody. The benefits of doing that is because you can't control what happens to your message, really. Staying on message limits the impact of that message being changed because people share it with their colleagues. And it goes for positive marketing messages as well. It's not just crisis management communications. You can't stop other people talking about your projects. And when the story is positive and you want people to be sharing information about your project, you want them to be talking about it. So these days, everybody has an audience. I mean, they always have had, because colleagues convened around the water cooler, around the kettle in the office kitchen. But today they have technology, tools to share information more quickly with their networks through internal social networks, social media. And when they do share, they'll add their opinion there as well. And they can reach a lot of people very quickly. So I suppose the message about problems when it comes to communication is it's not about people who stop projects. People don't stop projects. It's people who do stop projects. It's not the crisis. The crisis itself you can deal with and manage, but it's the people who might lose confidence or who might decide that actually this project needs to stop. So be prepared when you're doing your project communications planning for that kind of problem, because it gives you a better chance of controlling gossip, controlling unhelpful communications, and limiting the overall impact on your project. Now this diagram here is very linear, but it's important to recognise that the more you can hear about what's being said by the people who hear your message, the easier it will be for you to correct the story or to respond to their concerns. And that's where feedback loops come in. They really are an essential part of your marketing communication because you need to know what's working. And if it isn't working, ditch it, stop, try something else. A simple way to start gathering feedback is to ask people, really. Next time you send out a message, for example, you write an article for your internal staff newsletter, stick a bit at the bottom with your email address and a call to action that says send you their comments. When you do receive remarks, go back to them, thank them, act on their feedback, and close the loop by telling them what you've done with it. You also get formal feedback loops because you have post-implementation reviews at the end of projects. I think, though, you get more immediate feedback than that with communication activities, especially if you're talking to somebody face-to-face. And I do think it's worth building formal feedback loops into your marketing activities. It gives you a chance to track how you're doing and correct your course if necessary. So let me tell you about a project where I've done this. It's been really successful, actually. With this particular project, I tracked customer satisfaction results monthly on each stakeholder group, and they had the opportunity to rate the project team across 4 measures: management of top issues, our overall communication, our overall planning and delivery. And the stakeholder group that you see here and that gave my project team, the worst scores across everybody was the IT department. That's the graph, that's the green line. And it's a bit embarrassing, really, because that's the team that I work in. And the problem that I had was that I was spending, and my team was spending, so much time communicating to stakeholders outside of the project team and outside of our immediate colleagues in my department that they were getting a rough ride. We gave them too many last-minute requests. We made assumptions that didn't allow them to do their jobs efficiently. And once we started tracking this monthly stakeholder satisfaction and asking them how we were doing as a project team, and hearing that they were only scoring us 4 out of 10, well, when you hear that, you want to do something about it, and we did. And as you can see, we turned that around over the course of quite a long time, but we got that up to 9 out of 10, and we had great working relationships with them by the end. We managed that because we had a monthly conversation with each department head to explain how we were addressing their concerns. And we said, what else could we do to improve the experience of being on this project, being involved in this project? And we proactively marketed what we were doing differently, so they felt that we had really listened and that we were acting on what they had said. So that helped me manage expectations, improve the satisfaction, which is nice, but improve project management practice, which is better. And it was an exercise in marketing both the project and the achievements. There's a lot more about it actually in my book, Customer-Centric Project Management, if you're particularly interested in how we picked up and actually implemented this. But from it, we learned 2 things. First, you've got to be able to adapt what you're doing. And second, satisfied, engaged stakeholders are a massive asset when things go wrong. Because putting in all of that effort builds you the social capital and the great relationships you need, and that's a huge advantage when you need to take difficult decisions. And there are difficult decisions on projects to take, and you have to be brave about it. All this marketing activity will hopefully have left you with a big group of stakeholders who understand your project and they are excited to be part of it. But they aren't always good news for everyone. Much of what I've talked about today applies best to the positive messages about benefits, value, helping people go through the change that comes when you're changing their working practices. When your project is doing something that is much harder, like a project that creates redundancies or it closes facilities or outsources services, you have a much more difficult job, but you've still got to tackle it head first. So be brave, talk about the difficult things, because in the main, people appreciate honesty, clarity, and knowing where they stand, even if that means they don't have a job in a few months. However hard the message, living with uncertainty and rumour is normally harder. So you can help people adjust to the new reality and tell them how you are going to help them through this difficult time. But you've got to face up and have that difficult conversation first. From all the tools available to you, face-to-face communication is definitely the best choice when it's not good news. So to summarise, because I've talked for quite a long time now, we've looked at 10 tips for project marketing, why project marketing matters. We've talked about some tools that you can use to do it. Project marketing is really about taking your project communications to the level above functional communications. It supercharges your project communications planning, it builds engagement, and it promotes your achievements. It gets people to believe in and want what you have to offer. So I'm going to end by saying, sometimes that type of project report that I showed you at the beginning is okay. It's not inherently bad. It's what I use with my project sponsor because he asked for it. He doesn't want videos, he doesn't want a mug with a slogan on. He uses his BlackBerry most of the time. He can't read this on his BlackBerry, but he wants it. And he even designed a template. So sometimes the traditional ways of structured project communication are perfectly okay and get the job done. Mostly, I think you can do better. I think you can do a better job by stepping away from the minimum project communication plan and that power and influence stakeholder grid, which is somewhere in your project filing. With some creative thinking, some good planning, some active management, project marketing can get you some really great results. It can help engage your stakeholders and contribute to delivering your project more successfully. So, thank you very much for coming along to this session today. As I said, I'm Elizabeth Harrin from A Girl's Guide to Project Management. So thank you for your attendance. What I'm going to try and do now is go back to the questions and I'll see what people have asked. So we've got some questions that have come in here. Can you get a copy of the slides? Yes, if you joined late, you can definitely get a copy of the slides. I don't know if the session was being recorded. Sorry. Let me see if I can make this question session a bit larger. Here we go. So I suppose most people have wanted to find out whether they can get copies of the slides. So if I can tell you that there is this presentation is available on SlideShare, and I'm just trying to think of the link off the top of my head. If you have any questions at all that don't get answered today, or you can't find the presentation on SlideShare, you can contact me through my website. The link's there. There's a contact form, and I can always email them to you. Some of the other questions are around how that's about if the session's being recorded, where do we keep them? I'm afraid I don't know that. I don't think we have recorded this presentation, but like I say, it's available on SlideShare, so we can have a look at it there. Are there any other questions? Roger has asked, can I show the main slide of the 10 points? I'm not sure what you mean by that. There wasn't one slide that detailed every single point. But if you want to get in touch with me, and I can fill you in on that, definitely. Right, well, feel free. If I don't think there's any questions here that I haven't addressed, so if